It's lonely being an artist. It's hard to be an artist. It feels isolating. You feel misunderstood on the daily. You don't even understand yourself on the daily. And yet, I want you to know you are not alone. Would you naturally put these folks together? Do these look like collaborators? She was participating in the civil rights movement in the 60s. He came of age in alternative rock, but they both live in Chicago. One lives on the south side, one lives on the north side. They had to travel to find each other, cross bridges, cross barriers. What do you think about the result? Right? Yeah. She won a Grammy at age 75 for the Best Americana album, 2013. This is the power of collaboration. I'm thrilled to share with you and to come from Hollywood. And you might say, man, I really don't want to hear from Hollywood today. But I've thought a lot about collaboration in preparation for today. I've thought about some of the great collaborations of all time. These are some of my favorites. Mac and cheese. Love it, right? Very Wisconsin roots there with mac and cheese. If you're going to go down to New Orleans, you might get red beans and rice. Another great combination. In Los Angeles, we have an interesting combination called chicken and waffles. Has it made it here? We got some chicken and waffles here. Don't knock it until you try it. Then I saw the title. Cam said it's "Let the Art Speak Between Friends," and so I thought, who are some of the great friendships of all time? And I thought, Bert and Ernie. Absolutely. Vast improvement over Tom and Jerry. Of course, my favorite collaboration is probably Ben and Jerry. I'm a filmmaker by background, so I thought about some movie friendships. You have Butch and Sundance. You have Thelma and Louise. And you have Han and Chewie. All outlaws. That's kind of interesting. My favorite film of all time is Casablanca. And as I was speaking yesterday, I was talking with Asher about it, he actually reminded me in my favorite film of all time, it seems like it's about romance. Who's seen the film? How's it end? What's it end with? Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I hope that will be the case today, that there may be some beautiful friendships formed of folks who are coming in as strangers, right? Jesus has that ability to take strangers and make them into friends. When I think about Scripture, there's not that many historical friendships in the Bible. You have David and Jonathan knit together almost from the beginning. They were clearly fast friends, according to Scripture, and sharing things in common, and Jonathan sharing his symbols of wealth and acclaim, the royal robe, the weapons, the armor, the sword, and the belt, bestowing that upon his friend. Friendship and women in the Bible, there's not enough examples. But I thought this was interesting. Women's Day said, some friends play at friendship, but a true friend sticks closer than one's nearest kin. And that's true. I live a long way from my brother. So there are friends who are much closer to me than my brother on a daily basis. I thought this one was interesting. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man, and do not associate with one easily angered. You may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared. So that's Women's Day's advice, ladies. I don't know. Scriptural, I guess, Interesting collaborations. There are friends and collaborators who also sometimes become frenemies, even while they're creating. If you know the gentleman behind the Mikado, who are those folks on the right? Gilbert and Sullivan, right? Kind of prickly characters. If you've seen the movie Topsy Turvy, you'll see that they didn't always get along. Here's some other musical collaborators. They gave us, anybody recognize these folks? It's a long time now. They gave us this. Kind of the voice of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Speaking of the 60s, this is some interesting collaborators. You recognize these folks? The guy on the right, nobody knows, but the woman on the left is Carole King. She started as a songwriting duo in the Brill Building. These are just a few of the songs that they brought us. Soundtrack of an entire decade until they split up and the romance was no longer there. She did fine. I haven't heard about Jerry lately, but she did all right. A lot of talent. We need folks who might fill in our gaps. This room might be full of right-brainers. We might need some left-brain thinking here. Do you know which brain you're operating on? I lean a little heavily from one side to the other. We need folks to complement ourselves. You think about it in technology. If you're going to deal with video game design, right, you're going to have one side that's doing UX, the other side that's doing the UI. Somebody's going to design it and somebody's going to have to program it. You're going to need help. The right brain and the left brain working together. These are some of my favorite designers. We may be sitting on something by them today. I'm not sure who made these exquisite chairs, but Charles and Ray Eames, married couple, designed, beauty and beautiful spaces. Gave us comfort with chairs like this that had style as well as back support. This is their living room, right? It's just kind of sitting there casually. Oh yeah, this little something we made out of some bent plywood and some, Of course, they were also accomplished filmmakers, working together, maybe one with the camera, one with the set design, filling in things for each other. That question you just asked, Cam, great question. I don't really know exactly how their labor was divided. How did they complement each other? Perhaps right brain and left brain. My wife is a Saori weaver. She discovered this during COVID and found it incredibly meditative and freeing. And it's created by Masao Joe and Kenzie Joe. Masao was the mom and Kenzie was the son. She had the idea. He's the one who built the loom. All right, let me see what I can do for you, Mom. What's the key of Saori weaving? You're allowed to make mistakes. There's no patterns. You just start going. Right? It's like, wow, I got to try that. Other collaborators. Those guys did okay. Where did Lennon and McCartney meet? As teenagers. This is a picture of them in Paul's living room writing the song, I Saw Her Standing There. She was just 17, if you know what I mean. And they were probably 18 at the time they were writing about this 17-year-old. Anybody been to Liverpool? I've actually had the opportunity to be in that living room. His house has been preserved, and to see the modest circumstances that he grew up in. Look, see that fireplace and the TV behind it? Same spot. So to get in the house and they let us actually sit in the chairs, I was like, are you kidding? This is holy ground for rock and roll. Of course, there's the unholy side of rock and roll. And who would believe that these are the two who are still together? They're still on tour. I'm going to see them for the first time in 3 weeks in Phoenix. They're still touring. They have a new album. Amazing. That's the rock and roll generation. How about the hip hop generation? Right? That's a different form of collaboration, but just as powerful. This is Misdemeanor Elliott and her producer Timberland. And he had the beats, she had the rhymes, and she was like, no, that's a bad beat. No, that's a bad beat. No, give me another beat. You got to have something better than that. 100 beats before she's like, yeah, okay, that sounds good. I can rap over that. Who are the most famous songwriting duo right now? They won the Grammy for Song of the Year. They won the Oscar for Song of the Year. Do you know who that is? Brother and sister. Phineas and Billie. Billie Eilish. How did they develop their style? When did they start playing together? Teenagers. How did they start practicing? How did they have a lot of time? Their parents didn't make them go to school. They were homeschooled. So they just sit around their bedrooms all day, just like, how about this? How about that? So they did their 10,000 hours before they were like 16, 17. Those parents look pretty smart right now, even if the kids are kind of dumb, on one sense, right? They didn't get a certain kind of education, but they sure got something else. Their song from the Barbie soundtrack, What Was I Made For? That was the song of the year. And I call it the question of the era. I think that's what haunts us as people right now, trying to figure out what are we made for as artists, as creators, as creatives. But when you see, right, a producer, a songwriter, and a singer come together, there's this magical something that happens. And that's this equation, right, where 1 + 1 = 3. And I think we see that in these collaborations. And you're going to see a lot of collaborations on stage where there's this third thing that emerges from us coming together. I recently wrote this book because as a professor at Grand Canyon University, I have around 2,000 artists that I'm in charge of. We have design, animation, theater, music, dance, film. All of that is under my domain. And Grand Canyon University says 2,000 artists, it's kind of a small endeavor. Do you think you could grow that? Because for their measurement of, like, they have over 100,000 students, they're like, oh, it's this little small thing over here. But even when I look at your situation here, I'm like, look at you, Upper House, surrounded by, right, music, art, theater. You're like the fourth corner here in this arts center of Madison. I wrote this book because of those 2,000 artists and their anxiety. They're a little bit worried about this moment that they're graduating into. What is going to happen in the AI world? Will there be jobs for me? Will I be replaced? I don't know about yourself. You may be wondering as well. I think it's very strange to think about humans doing the hard jobs on minimum wage while the robots are writing poetry and painting. Not the future that any of us had envisioned, right? This is not the art that I want to buy. Even if it's beautiful, I don't want it. I guess my message through the book and for you all today is the same message that Isaiah offered, which is to fear not, because you're not alone in your artistic endeavor. You're not alone as creatives here in Madison and the greater community. In response to AI, I decided instead to advocate for what I would call HI. I still believe in human ingenuity, human imagination, human innovation. This, I think, will allow us to continue to adapt and figure out what to do with these new tools and how to not be consumed by them, right? But to keep that in proper perspective. In the book, there you can see 9 chapters, actually 11 if you add introduction and conclusion. It's really 3 different parts. I start by focusing on us as people, which as artists, that's where it usually begins. We're dealing with our fears. We're dealing with our aspirations. We're dealing with our limitations, coming to terms with all of those things, like what is in my hand? What am I afraid of? Why am I not writing, creating, painting? We have to get over our own hurdles before we even start. Then once we start, we can move towards the process. And maybe we've practiced and we've worked and we've developed a craft and we've put in that time. But then how do you get in this posture, right, where you're ready for this honest reception, this thing of just like, God, where are you? Where is the muse? Where is the idea? And then honest perception, looking at the culture, looking at the moment and saying, okay, what needs to be said? What am I seeing? What am I perceiving? And that combination of reception, right, open hands, and then seeing, somewhere in there, right, is where this magic starts to happen. I think where most of us stumble is really oftentimes in this third part. And I'm going to focus mostly today on number 7 and number 8. Which is, what do we do with the stuff we've created? We have this idea, we have this notion, and we're not sure what to do with it. We're not sure, is this good? Is it done? Is it finished? Who wants it? How do I take it to the marketplace? Is anybody paying attention? This was the struggle of Vincent. He didn't have a problem on the production end. He produced all kinds of work. He just didn't know what to do with it and couldn't find anybody to advocate it. Didn't really have a place that was hosting it. And so what I want to focus on is both our needs as artists, which I think are needs for other people, our needs for people whose expertise is not ours, people who can think of things and see things in different ways from us. And then how do we deal with the criticism and the feedback that we get? How do we deal with the fear of dealing with another person and what they're going to say, of collaborating with someone who might disagree with our vision? How do we process that? Does that sound good? All right. I will start then with this very important question. Who invented the margarita? I love margaritas. I'm from Southern California. We get a lot of margaritas because it's hot almost all the time. It's a beautiful place to be from. Who invented the margarita? What do you think? Margarita? Yeah, right? Did she invent it? It's named after herself? There's all these crazy theories. There's bartenders, in Mexico claiming they made it. There's hotels saying, I invented it. I think one of the Hilton heiresses said, oh no, I invented this and brought it to my friends. It's named after Margarita. It's named after Daisy. There's all these different theories. But nobody owns the patent on the margarita. Whoever invented it didn't get credit. Who's the closest person to taking credit for inventing the margarita? Jimmy Buffett. As far as I know, Jimmy Buffett has made more money off the margarita than anybody else, right? You can go to his Margaritaville restaurant. It's not just a song. I got a restaurant. What else does he have? He's got a resort. He's got a cruise. He's even got a retirement community in Florida. You can live in Margaritaville all the time. Jimmy Buffett, not the greatest songwriter, but a brilliant businessman. He died as a billionaire from one stupid song about a drink he didn't invent. That's a genius you and I lack. What are our honest needs? What are our honest needs as artists? What do we need? What do we lack? We're Vincent's in search of a Theo. What did these guys need in the Cavern Club in Liverpool? They needed a different drummer. There it was. Some call him the fifth Beatle. But look at the other change that happened. What happened? They got some style. They got some fancy suits. They got cleaned up. Who suggested that? It might have been that other fifth Beatle. What was that guy's name? Brian Epstein. They needed a manager. He was only a few years older than him, but he was more of an adult than they were. That's one kind of fifth Beatle, right? An agent, a manager, someone to take care of the stuff, do the bookings, do the receipting, make sure we got paid, check the contracts, make sure you're not being ripped off. Anybody need some help in that area? Here's another version of a fifth Beatle. Who's that guy? Smoking casually amongst the boys. Who's that? That's their producer, George Martin. That's a different kind of fifth Beatle, right? Someone who brought ears to the proceedings, who had maybe more formal classical training. And so he could take what they were aspiring to and say, okay, I think this is the instrument you need. I think this is the orchestration that we're going to put around a day in the life. You want to do this kind of sound? Come into our studio and I will help you via mic technique, via boards, right? Those three back there, thank you. You make us feel good and beautiful every day. Let's give them a big hand, right? Couldn't be done without them. They're sitting over there being like invisible. They're like hiding behind glass. But you're so important to us. A lot of bands need a lot of help like that. A lot of artists need help like that. Everybody knows about these four guys from U2. Who's that guy with the glasses? That's the fifth member of U2. That's their manager, standing in the middle. You've never seen him on stage. That's Paul McGuinness, the fifth member of U2. Why have they been able to stay together all these years? Because early on he said, you know what? Let's divide this thing up equally. I know that, Bono and The Edge write most of the songs, but you know what? Let's just split it, 20% each. And we'll just go as a band of five brothers. And they've kept together after so many others have split up. They also needed a producer, right? They're all looking one way. Who's the producer looking the other way? That's Brian Eno. Again, golden ears, someone who understood electronics, someone who understood recording. Somebody who can say, yeah, that's great, guys. We need to go this way. So what aren't you good at? I think that's a question. What do you honestly need? Think about it. You might feel it already. You might already know the answer to that. But where do you find that? Who is that person? Who is that Theo to your Vincent? It might be an agent. It might be a manager. It might be a producer. There's people who are good at organizing and herding cats, which is what we are. We're like 60 house cats in this room, very hard to herd. What do all these bands have in common? We got the Beastie Boys, Adele, Kanye West, the Dixie Chicks, Johnny Cash, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. What do they all have in common? That guy with the glasses. Who's that spooky guy? Rick Rubin, probably the greatest producer on the planet. My neighbor in Malibu. His studio is right next to my kid's high school. Nobody even knows it's there. It's behind like this walled gate. All of these people coming through that studio saying, Rick, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I've got these songs. Could you help me fix them up? He's not a musician. He doesn't really play anything. He sits on a couch and just listens. And has been paid so much money to do that. That guy's a genius. Have you seen him lately? That's what he looks like now. He's moved from, underground, punk, heavy metal guy to Zen artist. This is the best-selling book on creativity in America right now. And it's about a way of being. It's not even about a technique, a way of being. What's his genius? Anybody seen this book, The 6 Types of Working Genius? New book. I think you guys have talked about it some here. It's very interesting. It talks about those who are good at ideas, those who are better at activation, and those who are better at implementation. And it suggests that nobody has maybe more than 2 of these types of geniuses. Some people are good at maybe another 2. They don't love it, but they can do it. And then there's probably 2 that you just hate. You just avoid. Like, I don't like that part, Rick Rubin, I think, is probably great at the second half of this. He doesn't have to come up with the ideas. The artists bring the ideas. He says, okay, all right, let me discern what it is that you're aiming for here. How do I galvanize other musicians to gather around you? What other instruments and sounds do we need? How do I enable you to succeed at whatever you're doing? Who else can do Kanye West and the Dixie Chicks, right? These are not like each other. What a brilliant listener who can take both of those disparate sounds and then has the tenacity to bring it into the marketplace. That's a different kind of gift. Artists need support. They need backup. And when they don't have backup, you know what happens? Things like this. Why was Tom Cruise jumping on Oprah's couch? That is not movie star behavior. Why was he going on the Today Show and critiquing Brooke Shields and her postpartum depression and saying Scientology has the answers? This is not movie star behavior. He's supposed to look like this. And in like 6 months, this is what he looked like. What happened to Tom Cruise when he went off the rails? He lost someone very close to him. Who'd he lose? Who's that? Is it his mother? It's his publicist. He fired his publicist. He thought he was big enough and smart enough that, you know what, I'm just going to have my sister manage my affairs. I don't need you. I know what I'm doing. 6 months, just... She was always right there. You never saw her, but Pat Kingsley, his publicist, was right on his shoulder saying, Tom, don't say that. Tom, no, stop. No, we're done. This interview's finished. Yep. No, Tom's not weird. He's mysterious. Tom, let's go. Let's get off stage. Right? She was always there. Look, she's hiding in plain sight. Right? All the cameras are focused on them, and she's right there going, okay, nope, Tom, less, a little less. Nope, turn to the right. Okay, Tom, now exit. He was convinced he was the genius. And he lost his status like that because he didn't understand how to listen to someone who had some outside perspective. Do you need a publicist? You might say, that seems weird, that seems Hollywood, right? Maybe you at least need someone who can build a website. That's a form of publicity, right? Someone who can create a brand around you, someone who can design and show people what you should look like. Maybe that's a gallerist. Anybody are you represented? Is there places to be seen, right? Very important folks to provide a space like they've provided a space here. Bad gallerists can be problematic. This was the most powerful gallerist in New York in the 80s. This is the person who brought us, Mary Boone brought us, Basquiat and all these other artists. What's she doing lately? She's doing prison time. She's doing prison time because she was also doing funky things with all that money that she was making off those artists. This is a guy who moved into my neighborhood. He's a gallerist in Los Angeles, and my wife and I were trying to figure out, like, where did he make his money and what's he up to? This article about him in the New York Times Magazine described him as the art world's patron Satan. That's my neighbor. See him on the beach, take walks together. How's it going? Good. This year, in the midst of his art world and the things he was doing to, make money, he decided to run for the Senate. Didn't win, but did it anyway. This is why you need lawyers. This is why you need accountants. You need somebody to watch the money because you don't know what these people who are collecting your money are doing with it. It's why artists sue people, right? Tom Petty famously sued his record company. He was like, I want out. Prince sued his record company. He wanted out. In the meantime, while he's suing those folks, Tom's on the couch. So sometimes what do artists need? They need trainers. This is Tom Petty's trainer, Catherine, who was also my trainer. So when she wasn't training me, and look at these results. I mean, come on, this is amazing. She was hired like every May, April or May, she'd be hired, and her job was to go into Tom's house and get him off the couch. And she would bring a chef with her, Elizabeth. Catherine and Elizabeth would nurse him back to health enough to get him on stage, to get through another summer of shows so that he could then go back into the house and sit on the couch. We know how it ended, right? Not healthy. So how do we take care, right? If you're a performer, if you're an artist, how do you take care of your body? How do you serve the temple, right? The physical temple that God has given you. Very important. So you might need a stylist. You might need a trainer. You might need a chef. If the Beatles needed a stylist, you might need a stylist as well. Sounds really crazy, right? You're like, this is not Midwestern talk right here. Perhaps Tom Petty really needed a therapist. That may have been what he actually needed. I don't think he had a spiritual leader in his life. He didn't have a priest that he could turn to. And he really, I think, needed a prophet who could speak into his life and say, Tom, you need help, man. You got to fix this because you're not well. You're not well. There's people we need in our life to do that, and that is something that happened in the Bible. David needed a Jonathan. David also needed who? He needed a Nathan. Someone to speak some hard truth into his life, speak some sense into him when he was making bad decisions and bad choices. Someone who had some outside perspective. And so it begins with honest needs, but then we also have to have room for accepting honest criticism. And that's hard as an artist. T.S. Eliot figured it out. He said, honest criticism and sensitive appreciation are directed not upon the poet, but upon the poetry. He figured out how to separate the two. It's really hard, right? Because it's us. That's my work on the wall. And so that critique feels like it's a critique of me. And it's like, no, I'm not critiquing you. I'm just critiquing that choice. Maybe that color, that shape. Have you thought about just turning it a little bit this way? How do you separate those two? Really hard to do. But I think it's what separates, right? Okay work, right? How do you go from good to great? Do you have the ears to hear as well as the eyes to see? That's what Jesus asked for us as followers. Toni Morrison said, some authors really want their books to be loved and want themselves to be loved. I don't want that. I don't want my hand held. I don't want to be stroked. I don't want to be patronized. That's how you get better. And that was her relationship with her editor. We're going to hear about some of that relationship between editor and writer here today. Clement Greenberg, art critic. He said the superior artist is the one who knows how to be influenced. That's interesting. Knowing how to be influenced, right? There's bad criticism. There's criticism that's wrong. So how do you learn to discern, right, what you need to listen to? Who did Clement Greenberg essentially create in America as an art critic? That's where Jackson Pollock came from. Maybe Jasper Johns too, but Jackson Pollock. Clement Greenberg veered between publicist as well as critic. If you think about that, right? A critic who likes your work actually becomes your best publicist. And so we would say, no, I'm not interested in publicity. But what did you see in that video for me? Oh, they grabbed a quote from Publishers Weekly and said, well, Publishers Weekly said this. So now Publishers Weekly is my friend when they give me a good review. And then they're my frenemy when they give me a bad review. But Jackson Pollock. And then you look in the background of this, and who else is behind Jackson Pollock there? Have you seen the movie? It's about his relationship with his wife. That's Lee Krasner, who was also a painter, who in a sense sacrificed her own career for the sake of bolstering him and lifting him up. Maybe the last beauty of it all is that the artist who portrayed her, Marcia Gay Harden, she won the Oscar. Ed Harris didn't. So that's a little poetry, perhaps, that Lee Krasner's story, in a sense, was more interesting on screen than Jackson Pollock's kind of effusive self-interest. Criticism's hard. It's hard. I mean, right? We say, oh, iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. I don't like to be hammered. That is hard. That hurts. Bam, bam, bam. We sometimes feel pounded on. How do we respond to criticism? How do you develop those ears to hear? That armadillo hide that can sort of take it, right, and still carry on. I think one of the greatest examples that I talk about in the book, Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. Who hasn't read this book, right? Everybody reads it. In junior high, high school, this is probably the one thing in America everybody reads still. He's probably our favorite lawyer of all time. I don't know another lawyer that we love, right? We mostly hate lawyers. Here's a lawyer we love. He's defending justice. He's standing up for those who've been wrongly accused. Who was the character based on? Who was it rooted in? Where did Harper Lee grow up? She grew up in Alabama. She watched a lot of racism happen in her community. And so we say, Atticus Finch, that's the kind of person I want to be. But what happened when she published that other version, that recent version? Did you read that one? Go Set a Watchman was the first version of To Kill a Mockingbird. It was the early draft that they still held on to. And her editor read this and said, I don't know, Harper. If you've read this, you're like, I don't really like that main character. Atticus is a bit of a racist. he really associates with the wrong people. He makes the wrong choices. I don't like him. And what was Harper Lee thinking? Well, that's really who my dad was. That's fine. We don't want to read about that guy. Maybe this is Tay Hayhoff, who was her editor in New York City. Tay, at the time, was working on a book of her own called A Ministry to Man, The Life of John Lovejoy Elliott. And Tay had an idea of what is discipleship look like? What does following Jesus really look like? What does moral courage look like? And it was John Lovejoy Elliott. And so she basically said to Harper, could you make him maybe more like this? Someone we're rooting for rather than against. Someone we admire and aspire to be. Change the whole trajectory of the book, change the whole trajectory of Harper Lee's life, change the whole trajectory of 8th grade literature. That's the power of a good editor who can see what you're aspiring to say, but not quite getting to. And so we admire Atticus Finch, and we have no idea who John Lovejoy Elliott was. That's the power of an editor. We all need them. I tell you who else needs them. What do all these films have in common? Same director. What's his name? Martin Scorsese. Everybody's like, oh yeah, greatest director in America, amazing, unbelievable, uncompromising. And yet, who's behind him? His editor, Thelma Schoonmaker. That's the woman who puts his films together. They're almost always too long. Imagine how long they'd be without her. That's the collaboration. She's the secret brains behind his operation. How long have they been collaborating together? About that long. They met while he was in film school at NYU. And things were still on film, which is why they call it cutting a picture, right? And of course, she had to adapt to all the technology over the last 50 years. But here they are, side by side, cutting together things like Goodfellas. Who's the real brains in the operation? He's won one Oscar. How many has she won? Hollywood knows. Who's the brains of that operation? All right. Final thoughts. Who else do we need? I love that you set me up, Cam, with Vincent and Theo, because Theo was truly his one and only patron. And we need him. We all need him. I talk about it in the book, chapter 8. We need patrons. Always have. You would not have this, right? There's no Botticelli, there's no Venus on the half shell without the Medicis. If you go to Florence and you go to see Venus on the half shell, what's the gallery called? The Uffizi, right? The Uffizi Gallery. What's that word stand for? What's it mean? Uffizi is just the Italian word for office. So whose office was it? The Medicis. It was just the art hanging in their office. And then they were like, you know what? Let's give this to the state because we think this should be preserved. It's really not for us. And so it was like the 5th generation of Medici who signed it over. The last kind of heiress, I think she was an heiress to the fortune, and she was like, you know what, I'm going to give this to the community as a public trust. And the Uffizi Gallery is just the Medici office transformed. You need a patron to form a movement, to form a renaissance. In fact, the Harlem Renaissance really came about via a patron. You know the music, you know Billie Holiday, you know Louis Armstrong, you know Harlem and all those things that happened. You know about Langston Hughes and County Cullen, some of the great poets, their work from the Dark Tower, County Cullen, talking about the frustrations of being an African-American artist, and how in the dark we hide the heart that bleeds and wait and tend our agonizing seeds, hoping we'll be noticed, hoping we'll be noticed. Why was it called From the Dark Tower? Because there was a building in Harlem that they called the Dark Tower, where they would gather. Who owned it? Alelia Walker. Alelia Walker. Ever heard of her? She was an heiress to a fortune. Who was her mom? Madam C.J. Walker. She inherited all mom's hair care money, and I was like, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to throw some parties. I'm going to have some people over. I'm going to make space, a sacred space where they'll be safe to talk and create and gather. A safe space to talk and create and gather. Gosh, I wish you guys had a patron. If only you had someone who would say, you know what, I'm going to invest my wealth into cultural goods, into people, into artists. What an incredible blessing, right, that Stephen and Laurel Brown have offered. Look at this corner you sit upon, the cultural power that you're next to. And here we sit between friends in this cultural space. What a blessing. I'm blown away by the hospitality, by the beauty, by the wonder that is created in this space. How lovely that we're no longer foreigners and aliens, but we're now fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. I'll conclude with this other little band. How do you resist temptation? How do you overcome the discouragement that is part of being an artist? It's hard to be alone. You may feel little. You may feel small. You may feel like the journey is too far. The pull of Mordor, right, is of depression and frustration. It's strong, right? There's people who might steal your credits. There's hardly been a movie I've been on I didn't want to sue somebody on by the end. There's people who tempt you and say, oh, just do this. Just a little compromise along the way. It'll be fine. How do you resist? How do you resist? You're going to need someone who has your back. Someone who could be an agent, a manager, a lawyer, an accountant, right? He couldn't get there alone. He needed all three of those folks, all those categories backing him up. He needed a producer, a wise producer who had the golden ears, the lived wisdom. Might have needed a stylist. I don't know. Who else might you need? You need a stylist. You need a trainer. Someone who's athletic. You might need a chef. You might need an editor, someone who knows how to wield a sword. You need someone with golden ears, and you need someone who can create a sacred space for you to play in. A wizened tree beard who's sharing the wealth and the bounty. What do you need to survive and make it as an artist? What's the subtitle? You need a fellowship. Oddly enough, Tolkien knew, and he hit it right in plain sight. You want to get there? It's a long, hard journey. It's going to take a fellowship of different kinds of people. Folks who might seem like aliens and strangers, whose gifts are not your gifts, whose interests aren't yours, whose talents are unlike yours, who don't think like you. Can you make space? This has been a raid. I want you to know you are not alone. Amen.